14 years ago, on my 18th birthday, I woke up expecting cake and celebration. Instead, my parents Harold and Susan handed me a duffel bag and said the words that shattered my world. "You're an adult now, Delmar. Figure it out." They pushed me toward the front door while my younger brother Trevor watched from the upstairs window, his face pressed against the glass. I stood on that porch in complete shock, holding everything I owned in one bag as the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally slammed the door in my face and changed my life forever. The morning started like any other birthday in the Williams household, which meant it was already disappointing before it began. Harold, my father, worked as a supervisor at the metal fabrication plant across town, and he ruled our house with the same iron fist he used to manage his factory floor. Susan, my mother, sold real estate and had perfected the art of cold professionalism that served her well in business, but made her emotionally unavailable as a parent. They had always made it clear that Trevor, 2 years younger than me, was their golden child, while I was merely an obligation they tolerated. I came downstairs that Tuesday morning expecting at least some acknowledgement of my birthday, maybe even the chocolate cake Susan used to make for Trevor's special days. Instead, I found my parents sitting at the kitchen table with serious expressions and a packed duffel bag sitting by the back door. The sight of that bag made my stomach drop, but I couldn't have imagined what was coming next. "Sit down, Delmar," Harold said, without looking up from his coffee. His voice carried that familiar tone of barely contained irritation that I had grown accustomed to over the years. Susan kept her eyes focused on some real estate listings spread across the table as if this was just another business transaction. "Happy birthday to me, I guess," I said, trying to inject some humor into the tense atmosphere. Neither of them smiled. "You're 18 now," Susan said finally, looking up with those cold blue eyes that had never shown me warmth. "That makes you a legal adult. We've done our job raising you, and now it's time for you to take responsibility for your own life." I stared at them, waiting for the punchline or the reveal that this was some kind of twisted birthday surprise. It never came. Harold stood up and gestured toward the duffel bag. "We packed some clothes and essentials. You've got until noon to clear out your room of anything else you want to keep, but remember, you'll need to carry it yourself." The words hit me like physical blows. "You're kicking me out today on my birthday." "We're helping you become independent," Susan corrected with the same tone she used when explaining property values to difficult clients. "You graduated high school last month, and you're legally an adult. It's time you learned to stand on your own 2 feet. I looked around the kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast for 18 years, at the family photos on the refrigerator that included me, but somehow never seemed to feature me prominently, at the calendar on the wall where Susan had marked Trevor's baseball games and school events but never bothered to note anything important to me. "What about college?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay composed. "We talked about community college, and I was going to work part-time to help pay for it." Harold laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Son, we've been supporting you for 18 years. We've got Trevor's future to think about now, and frankly, we've done enough. You're smart enough and capable enough to figure things out on your own." As if summoned by the mention of his name, Trevor appeared in the kitchen doorway. At 16, he had already surpassed me in height and shared Harold's broad shoulders and Susan's sharp features. He looked between our parents and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What's happening?" Trevor asked, though something in his voice suggested he already knew. "Your brother is moving out today," Susan explained matter-of-factly. "He's starting his adult life." Trevor's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't protest or ask them to reconsider. He just nodded and grabbed a banana from the counter before heading back upstairs. That casual dismissal hurt almost as much as my parents' coldness. I spent the next 3 hours mechanically gathering my belongings, trying to make sense of what was happening. My room, which had never felt particularly personal or welcoming, looked even more sterile as I emptied it. I packed another bag with books, a few photos, and some sentimental items, but I had to leave behind my desk my bed and most of my childhood possessions. When noon arrived, Harold and Susan stood by the front door like security guards, waiting to escort me out of a building. I slung both bags over my shoulders and walked toward them, still hoping they would change their minds or reveal that this was all some elaborate test of my character. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked one final time. "That's for you to figure out," Harold replied. "You're an adult now, Delmar. Adults solve their own problems." I stepped onto the front porch and heard the door close behind me with a finality that echoed in my chest. As I walked down the driveway, I glanced back at the house and saw Trevor watching from his bedroom window. Our eyes met for a moment, and I thought I saw something that might have been sadness or guilt, but he quickly stepped away from the glass. Standing on the sidewalk with everything I owned in 2 bags, I felt smaller and more alone than I ever had in my life. The neighborhood around me looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but everything felt different. I was no longer a resident of Maple Street. I was just a homeless teenager with nowhere to go. The first twist in this nightmare came 2 days later, when I was sitting in the public library using their computers to search for jobs and apartments I couldn't afford. Mrs. Patterson, our elderly neighbor who had lived next door for as long as I could remember, approached me with a concerned expression. "Delmar, honey, I was so sorry to hear about your troubles," she said, settling into the chair beside me. "I saw what happened Tuesday and I've been worried sick about you." I appreciated her concern, but I was too embarrassed to discuss the details of my situation. "I'm doing okay, Mrs. Patterson. Just trying to figure out my next steps." She studied my face with the shrewd eyes of someone who had lived through 8 decades of human behavior. "Honey, I need to tell you something that might be hard to hear. I saw your parents loading up donation trucks 3 weeks ago. Big trucks from Goodwill and the Salvation Army. They were hauling out furniture from your room boxes of your old clothes photo albums, even that baseball trophy you won in Little League." The words hit me like ice water. 3 weeks ago. Maybe longer. I saw them doing it on multiple days always when you were at school or work. They had this whole operation planned out, sweetheart. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision they made on your birthday. I stared at the computer screen without seeing it, trying to process this revelation. My parents hadn't kicked me out in a moment of frustration or tough love. They had been systematically erasing me from their home for weeks, disposing of my childhood and my history like unwanted clutter. "I'm sorry, honey," Mrs. Patterson said gently. "I thought about saying something at the time, but I didn't want to interfere in family business. Now I wish I had." That night, I slept in Riverside Park on a bench near the playground where I had spent countless hours as a child. The irony wasn't lost on me. As I lay there under a thin blanket I had bought at a thrift store, staring up at stars, barely visible through the light pollution, I realized that my parents hadn't just abandoned me. They had been planning my elimination from their lives with the same careful attention to detail that Susan brought to her real estate contracts. The calculated nature of their betrayal hurt worse than the abandonment itself. This wasn't a moment of anger or disappointment in my choices. This was a deliberate, methodical disposal of an unwanted child who had finally reached the age where they could legally get rid of me. I was completely and utterly alone, and for the first time in my life, I understood that I always had been. The first month after my parents threw me out taught me lessons about survival that no high school class could have prepared me for. I spent my days walking between businesses, filling out job applications, and trying to project confidence despite sleeping in parks and washing up in gas station bathrooms. My savings from my part-time job at the grocery store amounted to $347, which seemed like a fortune until I started pricing apartments and realized it wouldn't even cover a security deposit anywhere. I eventually found work at Bradley's Warehouse, a massive distribution center on the outskirts of town that hired anyone willing to do manual labor for minimum wage. The job involved loading and unloading delivery trucks, organizing inventory, and doing whatever tasks the supervisors assigned throughout 10-hour shifts. My body ached constantly during those first weeks as I adjusted to the physical demands, but I was grateful to have steady income and a place to go each day. With my first paycheck, I managed to rent a room at the Crossroads Extended Stay, a rundown motel that charged by the week and didn't ask too many questions about employment history or references. The room smelled like stale cigarettes and cleaning chemicals, and the thin walls meant I could hear every conversation, argument, and television program from the neighboring units. But it had a bed, a small refrigerator, and a bathroom that was mine alone, which felt like luxury after sleeping outdoors. I was starting to find my rhythm and even saving a small amount each week when the real cruelty of my situation revealed itself. After 6 weeks of steady work, I decided to apply for a better position at Henderson's Auto Parts, a family-owned business that paid $2 more per hour and offered the possibility of learning a skilled trade. The interview went well, and the owner, Frank Morrison, seemed impressed with my work ethic and willingness to learn. 3 days later, Frank called me at the warehouse during my lunch break. His tone was apologetic but firm. "Delmar, I'm sorry, but I can't offer you the position we discussed," he said. "I did some checking around town as I do with all potential hires, and I heard some concerning things about your background." My heart sank. "What kind of things, Mr. Morrison?" "Well, your father, Harold, mentioned that you've had some problems with drugs and that there were some incidents of theft from your family. He seemed genuinely concerned about your well-being, but felt it was his responsibility to warn employers about potential issues." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "Mr. Morrison, I've never used drugs in my life, and I've never stolen anything from anyone. Whatever my father told you, it's not true." "Look, son, I'm sure you're trying to turn your life around, and I respect that. But I can't take the risk of hiring someone with that kind of history. I hope you understand." I understood perfectly. Harold and Susan weren't content with just throwing me out of their home. They were systematically destroying any chance I had of building a life in our town. The revelation that they were actively sabotaging my employment opportunities felt like being betrayed all over again. Over the following weeks, I discovered the full extent of their character assassination campaign. Harold had apparently spoken to several business owners, painting me as a troubled young man who had stolen money from his parents to buy drugs and had become violent when confronted about his behavior. Susan had shared similar stories with her real estate colleagues and clients, expressing fake concern about my well-being while simultaneously destroying my reputation. The most devastating part was how readily people believed their lies. Harold and Susan were respected members of the community. Harold had supervised dozens of men at the factory and was known for his no-nonsense approach to work and discipline. Susan had helped families buy and sell homes for 15 years and had built relationships throughout the county. Who was going to believe the word of an 18-year-old with no fixed address over two established professionals who were simply concerned about their troubled son? I tried confronting them directly, driving my beat-up Honda Civic to the house on Maple Street and ringing the doorbell like a stranger. Susan answered with the same cold expression she had worn on my birthday, as if she had been expecting this visit. "What do you want, Delmar?" she asked, without inviting me inside. "I want you to stop telling people I'm a drug addict and a thief," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want you to call Frank Morrison and anyone else you've spoken to and tell them the truth." "I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, with convincing innocence. "I've never said anything untrue about you to anyone." "People are telling me that Dad has been warning employers about my supposed drug problems and theft. You know that's not true, Mom. You know I've never done any of those things." Susan's expression didn't change. "Your father and I have occasionally expressed concern about your choices and behavior to people who asked about you. If potential employers are interpreting our honest concerns as warnings, that's not our responsibility." The casual cruelty of her response left me speechless. She was admitting to spreading lies about me while simultaneously denying any wrongdoing. Harold appeared behind her in the doorway, his arms crossed and his face set in the stern expression that had intimidated me throughout my childhood. "You need to leave now, Delmar," he said. "This is our property and you're not welcome here." "I just want you to stop lying about me," I pleaded. "I'm trying to build a life and you're making it impossible." "We've told people the truth about your behavior," Harold replied. If that's causing you problems, maybe you should examine your choices instead of blaming others. They closed the door without another word, leaving me standing on the porch where my journey into homelessness had begun. As I walked back to my car, I saw Trevor watching from the same upstairs window. This time, when our eyes met, he quickly closed the blinds. That night, sitting in my depressing motel room and calculating how long my savings would last, I realized I had two choices. I could stay in town and continue fighting against their lies and manipulation, or I could leave and start over somewhere fresh where Harold and Susan's poison hadn't reached. The decision was easier than I expected. 3 days later, I loaded everything I owned into my Honda and drove 3 hours south to Springfield, a mid-sized city where no one knew my name or my history. I used the last of my savings to rent a tiny studio apartment above Murphy's laundromat, a cramped space that reeked of fabric softener and detergent but offered privacy and independence. Finding work in Springfield proved easier than I had expected. Without Harold and Susan undermining my efforts, I was hired within a week at Riverside Construction, a mid-sized company that specialized in commercial and residential projects. The job paid better than the warehouse work and offered opportunities to learn useful skills like carpentry, electrical work, and plumbing. My supervisor was a weathered man named Ray Hendricks, who owned the company and had been building things for 30 years. Ray had the kind of practical intelligence that comes from decades of solving problems with his hands, and he seemed to recognize something in me that others had missed. He was patient with my inexperience, but demanding when it came to quality and safety. Construction work will teach you everything you need to know about life, Ray told me during my first week. You learn to plan ahead, work hard, solve problems, and take pride in what you build. But most importantly, you learn that you can create something good and solid from nothing but raw materials and determination. I worked double shifts whenever Ray would let me, partly because I needed the money and partly because I craved the satisfaction of building something tangible and useful. Each day, I could see the progress we were making on whatever project we were completing, whether it was framing a new house or renovating an old office building. After months of feeling like my life was falling apart, it was therapeutic to spend my days putting things together. My studio apartment was barely large enough for a bed, a small table, and a dresser, but I kept it clean and organized. I cooked simple meals on a hot plate and studied construction manuals and business books from the library during my evenings. Slowly, very slowly, I was building something that resembled a normal life. The damage my parents had done to my credit by taking out loans in my name without my knowledge became apparent when I tried to get a better apartment or a car loan. But even those obstacles felt manageable now that I was earning steady money and gaining valuable skills. I was learning that I was capable of far more than Harold and Susan had ever given me credit for. For the first time since my 18th birthday, I began to believe that I might actually be able to figure it out after all. Ray Hendricks became the father I had never really had, though it took me months to recognize what was happening between us. He was in his mid-50s with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin that told the story of decades spent working outdoors. Ray had built Riverside Construction from nothing, starting as a solo handyman and gradually expanding into one of Springfield's most respected contracting companies. What set Ray apart from other bosses I had encountered was his genuine interest in teaching rather than simply giving orders. He would explain why we used certain techniques, show me how to read blueprints and calculate materials, and patiently correct my mistakes without making me feel stupid or incompetent. Most people think construction is just about muscle and sweat, Ray said one afternoon as we were installing kitchen cabinets in a house renovation. But the best builders are thinkers. You've got to see 3 steps ahead, anticipate problems, and understand how every piece fits into the bigger picture. I absorbed everything he taught me like a sponge. During lunch breaks, Ray would quiz me about different aspects of the trade, challenging me to explain how electrical systems worked or how to calculate the load-bearing requirements for a deck. He lent me books about business management, project planning, and customer service. and we would discuss what I had read during our drives to job sites. 6 months into my employment at Riverside, Ray began giving me more responsibility. He would send me to meet with clients, supervise small crews on minor projects, and handle the ordering of materials and equipment. I discovered that I had a natural talent for seeing potential in damaged or outdated properties and calculating what it would cost to transform them into something beautiful and functional. The revelation of Ray's true intentions came on a Friday evening in late autumn. We had just finished a major renovation project, turning a run-down Victorian house into a stunning family home, and Ray suggested we grab dinner to celebrate. Over burgers and beer at Mickey's Tavern, Ray began sharing stories about his own background that he had never mentioned before. "I grew up in a house where I was never good enough," Ray said, staring into his beer. "My old man was a mean drunk who saw me as competition rather than a son. My mother was too scared of him to stand up for me or my sister. The day I turned 17, I lied about my age and joined the army just to get away from them. I listened in fascination as Ray described years of moving from place to place, learning construction skills while stationed at various military bases, and eventually settling in Springfield after his discharge. He had started his business with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox, sleeping in the truck during his first months while he built up enough clientele to afford rent. The reason I'm telling you this," Ray said, looking directly at me, "is because I recognize something in you that I saw in myself at your age. You've got intelligence, work ethic, and integrity, but you also carry yourself like someone who's been told he doesn't matter. I've been watching you for months, Delmar, and I know you're capable of far more than you realize." The conversation took an unexpected turn when Ray revealed that he had been deliberately testing me throughout my employment. He had given me increasingly complex projects and responsibilities to see how I would handle pressure, authority, and independence. He had sent me to deal with difficult customers, to assess my communication skills and professionalism. He had even asked other contractors and suppliers about their interactions with me to gauge my reputation in the industry. "Every test you've passed with flying colors," Ray continued. "You show up early, work hard, treat people with respect, and you're constantly trying to learn and improve. More importantly, you've got the kind of character that can't be taught. You're honest, reliable, and you care about doing quality work." What came next changed the trajectory of my life completely. Ray explained that he was considering expanding Riverside construction into residential renovation and property flipping, but he needed a partner who could handle the business side while he focused on the construction aspects. He offered me a partnership deal that included covering my tuition for night classes in business management and real estate, along with a substantial increase in salary and a percentage of profits from future projects. "I need someone I can trust completely," Ray said. "Someone who understands that our reputation is built on every job we complete and every customer we serve. I think you could be that person, but I want you to think about it carefully before you give me an answer." I was so overwhelmed by his offer that I could barely speak. No one had ever expressed that level of confidence in my abilities or offered me such an incredible opportunity. After months of being told by my parents that I was worthless and would never amount to anything, Ray's belief in my potential felt almost impossible to accept. Over the following weeks, I threw myself into learning everything I could about business operations, real estate markets, and project management. Ray enrolled me in night classes at Springfield Community College, where I studied accounting, marketing, and business law. During the day, he continued teaching me advanced construction techniques and involving me in the planning and budgeting for major projects. I discovered that I had a natural aptitude for identifying undervalued properties and visualizing how they could be transformed. Ray would drive me through different neighborhoods, and I would point out houses that were being neglected or sold below market value due to cosmetic problems that could be easily fixed. We would research the properties, calculate renovation costs, and project potential profits from either flipping or renting them. My living situation improved dramatically, as my income increased. I moved from the studio above the laundromat to a comfortable one-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood. I bought a reliable used truck that I needed for work and started building a savings account for the first time in my life. Most importantly, I began developing the kind of confidence that comes from being valued and respected by someone whose opinion matters. Ray's mentorship extended beyond professional development. He included me in family dinners with his wife, Carol, and their adult children, giving me a glimpse of what a healthy family relationship looked like. He remembered my birthday and celebrated my achievements in college courses. He offered advice about personal finances, relationships, and life decisions without being preachy or condescending. For the first time since my 18th birthday, I began to understand that my parents' rejection of me said nothing about my worth as a person and everything about their character. Ray saw qualities in me that Harold and Susan had either missed or chosen to ignore. Under his guidance and encouragement, I started to believe that I might actually be capable of building something meaningful with my life. The partnership with Ray became official 6 months later when we completed our first property flip together. We had bought a foreclosed house for $38,000, invested another $22,000 in renovations, and sold it for $79,000. Our profit of $19,000 was more money than I had ever seen at one time, and Ray insisted on splitting it equally despite my minimal financial contribution to the initial purchase. "This is just the beginning," Ray said as we celebrated our success. "With your eye for potential and my construction experience, we're going to build something special together." He was absolutely right. 5 years after Ray offered me that life-changing partnership, Riverside Construction had become one of the most successful renovation and investment companies in central Missouri. We had completed over 60 property flips, accumulated a portfolio of rental properties that generated steady monthly income, and built a reputation for quality work that kept us booked months in advance. My transformation during those years was remarkable even to me. I had earned my associate degree in business management, while working full-time developed expertise in construction techniques and project management, and learned to navigate the complexities of real estate investment. More importantly, I had gained the confidence that comes from proving to yourself that you can overcome devastating setbacks and build something meaningful from nothing. Ray and I had developed a system that maximized our respective strengths. I handled the business operations, including finding undervalued properties, negotiating purchases, managing finances, and dealing with real estate agents and lenders. Ray supervised the construction crews, ensured quality control, and managed the technical aspects of our renovation projects. Together, we could take a rundown house and transform it into a beautiful, functional home that families would love while generating substantial profits for our business. My personal life had also stabilized in ways I never could have imagined during those dark early months in Springfield. I lived in a beautifully renovated craftsman-style house that Ray and I had purchased as an investment property, but which I had fallen in love with and bought from the company at market value. The house featured original hardwood floors, restored crown molding, and a kitchen that I had designed and installed myself. It was the first place that had ever truly felt like home to me. I had been dating Ashley Martinez for 8 months, a relationship that had developed slowly from friendship into something deeper and more meaningful than I had experienced before. Ashley worked as a nurse at Springfield General Hospital and brought a stability and warmth to my life that I cherished. She appreciated my work ethic and ambition, but also helped me remember to enjoy the success I was building, rather than constantly focusing on the next project or goal. "You work like you're still that scared 18-year-old living in a motel room," Ashley had said to me recently. "But you're not that person anymore, Delmar. You've built something amazing, and you deserve to enjoy it." She was right, but old habits and insecurities die hard. I still saved aggressively and lived below my means, partly from practical financial planning, but partly from the fear that everything I had built could disappear as suddenly as my family had abandoned me. Ray often teased me about my reluctance to spend money on myself, but he understood the psychology behind it better than anyone. The success of our business had attracted attention throughout the region. We were featured in local newspapers and business magazines, highlighting our innovative approach to property renovation and our contributions to neighborhood revitalization. I had been invited to speak at real estate investment seminars and had developed a network of contacts that included other contractors, real estate agents, lenders, and city officials. Our latest project was our most ambitious, yet the renovation of an entire city block of Victorian houses that had been abandoned for years. The city had offered us an incentive package to tackle the project, recognizing that our work would revitalize the neighborhood and attract other investment. The scale of the undertaking required us to hire additional crews and coordinate with multiple subcontractors, but the potential profits were substantial. It was during this period of professional success and personal happiness that the first signs of trouble from my past began to emerge. The revelation came through an unexpected source. Ashley's cousin, Maria, who had moved to Springfield from my hometown of Cedar Falls for a teaching job. I had the strangest encounter last weekend. Ashley told me over dinner at our favorite restaurant. Maria went to visit some friends back in Cedar Falls, and she ran into your brother at a sports bar. She mentioned that she knew you, and he started asking all these detailed questions about your business and how well you were doing. The mention of Trevor made me pause. I hadn't spoken to anyone from my family since that horrible confrontation on their front porch 7 years earlier. As far as I was concerned, Harold, Susan, and Trevor were strangers who happened to share my last name. What kind of questions? I asked, though something in my gut already suspected the answer would be troubling. Specific questions about your house, your business, how much money you were making. Maria said it felt weird, like he was gathering intelligence rather than just making conversation. She got the impression he already knew quite a bit about your success. A chill ran down my spine as I processed this information. Trevor had never shown any interest in maintaining a relationship with me after my parents threw me out. His sudden curiosity about my financial situation and business success suggested something more calculated than casual brotherly interest. Over the following weeks, I began paying attention to my social media presence and online footprint in ways I never had before. I discovered that our company website included detailed information about our projects, including before and after photos of properties we had renovated. Local newspaper articles about our business included quotes from me and information about our expansion plans. My LinkedIn profile, which I had created for professional networking, contained information about my education, work history, and business accomplishments. The disturbing realization hit me that anyone who wanted to research my success could find substantial information about my financial situation and business operations with minimal effort. If Trevor was indeed gathering information about me, he would have found plenty of material to work with. I decided to test my suspicions by asking Ray to make some discreet inquiries with contractors and suppliers who worked throughout the region. What he discovered confirmed my worst fears. Multiple people reported being approached by someone claiming to be my brother, who asked detailed questions about Riverside Construction's projects, profits, and future plans. The person had presented himself as someone who was proud of my success and was considering investing in our business. "It's definitely reconnaissance," Ray said after compiling the reports. "Someone is conducting a systematic investigation into your business and personal finances. The question is why?" I knew why, even though I didn't want to admit it to myself. Harold and Susan had spent 7 years ignoring my existence. But now that I had achieved measurable success, they were suddenly interested in my life again. Their interest wasn't motivated by pride or affection. It was motivated by greed and entitlement. The thought that my parents might be planning to re-enter my life after years of abandonment and character assassination made me physically sick. I had worked incredibly hard to build something meaningful from the wreckage they had left behind, and the idea that they might try to claim some portion of my success was both infuriating and terrifying. "What are you going to do if they show up?" Ashley asked when I shared my suspicions with her. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me hopes they'll stay away, but another part of me wants the chance to tell them exactly what I think of them and everything they put me through. What I couldn't have anticipated was how much worse their eventual return would be than anything I had imagined during those sleepless nights when I worried about their motives. The reconnaissance mission Trevor had been conducting was just the beginning of a plan that would test every ounce of strength and resolve I had developed over the previous 7 years. But I was no longer the frightened teenager they had thrown out with nothing but a duffel bag. I had allies, now resources, and most importantly, the kind of confidence that comes from proving to yourself that you can overcome anything life throws at you. When Harold and Susan finally made their move, I would be ready for them. The confrontation I had been dreading arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in October. I was in my workshop behind the house restoring an antique oak table that Ashley and I had found at a flea market when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the workshop window, I saw Harold's silver Ford pickup truck and Susan's white BMW sedan vehicles I recognized despite the years that had passed. My hands trembled slightly as I set down my sandpaper and walked toward the front of the house. 7 years had passed since I had seen my parents, and I wasn't prepared for the emotional impact of their physical presence in my space. They looked older, of course, but they carried themselves with the same arrogance and self-righteousness that had characterized their treatment of me throughout my childhood. Trevor emerged from the passenger seat of Harold's truck, and I was struck by how much he had changed. At 23, he was taller and broader than I remembered, but he moved with an entitled swagger that reminded me uncomfortably of Harold in his younger days. He surveyed my property with obvious assessment, taking in the restored Victorian house, the landscaped yard, and the quality vehicles parked in the driveway. I met them on my front porch, deliberately positioning myself to block their access to my front door. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. They had once stood in their doorway to keep me out, and now I was standing in mine to keep them out. "Well, look at this," Harold said, gesturing broadly at my house and yard. "Our boy Delmar has done quite well for himself." The casual possessiveness in his voice made my jaw clench. "What do you want?" Susan stepped forward with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Is that any way to greet your family?" "We're proud of what you've accomplished, honey. You've built something really impressive here. We heard about your business success." Trevor added, his voice carrying a tone I couldn't quite identify. "The whole town's talking about how well you're doing down here in Springfield." I studied their faces, searching for any sign of genuine emotion or remorse for the way they had treated me. What I saw instead was calculation and determination, the expressions of people who had come here with a specific agenda. "You still haven't answered my question," I said. "What do you want?" Harold cleared his throat and assumed the authoritative tone he had used throughout my childhood when delivering pronouncements that weren't open to discussion. "We want to talk to you about family responsibilities and making sure everyone is taken care of properly." "Family responsibilities," I repeated slowly. That's interesting coming from people who threw me out with one bag and told the whole town I was a drug addict and a thief. "Now, Delmar," Susan said in her practiced real estate agent voice, "we know there were some misunderstandings in the past, but we're here to move forward as a family. We've always believed that family comes first, and we think it's time to make sure everyone benefits from the success that's been achieved." The euphemisms and careful language they were using told me everything I needed to know about their intentions. This wasn't about reconciliation or family bonding. This was about money and what they believed they were entitled to claim from the life I had built without them. "Let me be very clear," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building in my chest. "You are not my family. You stopped being my family the day you threw me out and tried to destroy my reputation. You have no claim to anything I've built, and you're not welcome on my property. Trevor stepped forward with a smirk that revealed his true character. Actually, big brother, we think we do have a claim. You see, Mom and Dad have been thinking about the future, and they believe this house would be perfect for me to start my own family. You're doing well enough that you could afford to buy something else, and it would mean a lot to the family if you made that gesture. The audacity of their demand left me temporarily speechless. They weren't asking for money or a loan. They were demanding that I give Trevor my house, the home I had purchased and renovated with money I had earned through years of hard work. "You're out of your minds," I said when I found my voice. "This is my house, which I bought with my own money, and I'm not giving it to anyone." Harold's expression hardened into the intimidating scowl that had frightened me as a child, but now just looked pathetic and manipulative. "Son, you need to think carefully about what family means. Trevor stayed loyal to us while you ran off and abandoned your responsibilities. He deserves some security and stability, and you're in a position to provide that." "What responsibilities did I abandon?" I demanded. "You kicked me out. You told me I was on my own, and that I needed to figure out my own life. We helped you become independent and self-sufficient," Susan replied with breathtaking hypocrisy. "And now that you've achieved success, we think it's appropriate for you to help your brother achieve the same kind of stability." The conversation was becoming increasingly surreal. They were rewriting history in real time, transforming their abandonment and abuse into some kind of gift they had given me. Their entitlement was so complete and so shameless that I wondered if they actually believed their own lies. But Trevor's next words revealed the true scope of their planning and the depth of their entitlement. "The truth is, Delmar, Mom, and Dad already promised me this house months ago," Trevor said, with a satisfied smile. "We've been watching your success from a distance, and we decided that since I'm the son who stayed loyal and supportive, I should inherit the benefits of what the family has achieved." "What the family has achieved?" I repeated incredulously. "I built this life completely on my own, with no help from any of you." "Family is family," Harold said with finality, "and family takes care of family. You can afford to buy another house, but Trevor is just getting started in life and needs the security that this property would provide." The final piece of their plan became clear when Susan pulled out a folder of documents from her purse. "We've actually had our attorney draw up some paperwork that would make the transfer simple and tax efficient. All you need to do is sign these documents, and Trevor can take over the mortgage and ownership." I stared at the folder in disbelief. They hadn't just decided to demand my house on a whim. They had consulted lawyers, prepared legal documents, and planned this entire operation in advance. Their sense of entitlement to the fruits of my labor was so complete that they had actually expected me to cooperate with their demands. "Get off my property," I said quietly. "Delmar, be reasonable," Susan began, but I cut her off. "Get off my property right now or I'm calling the police." Harold stepped closer to me, using his size to try to intimidate me the way he had when I was a child. "You're making a big mistake, son. We're giving you the chance to do the right thing for your family, and you're being selfish and ungrateful." I said, "Get off my property." Trevor's smirk widened as he delivered what he clearly thought was his knockout punch. "You might want to reconsider, big brother. See, Mom and Dad are in some financial trouble right now, and they owe some people who aren't very patient about getting paid back. If you don't help out the family voluntarily, we might have to explore other options for getting what we need." The threat was clear, even though it was couched in vague language. They were in debt to dangerous people, and they viewed my success as their solution. If I didn't voluntarily give them what they wanted, they were prepared to use more aggressive methods to take it. As I watched them walk back to their vehicles, Trevor turned around one final time. "We'll be in touch, Delmar. Family has a way of working things out one way or another." After they drove away, I sat on my front porch for a long time trying to process what had just happened. The people who had abandoned me, lied about me, and tried to destroy my future had returned to claim ownership of everything I had built. Their sense of entitlement was so complete that they had actually expected me to hand over my house to the brother who had watched silently while they threw me out. But what disturbed me most was Trevor's final threat and the implication that they owed money to people who might be willing to use violence to collect debts. I realized that this confrontation was just the beginning, and that my parents' desperation might make them capable of actions I had never imagined. I had spent 7 years building a life based on hard work, integrity, and the support of people who actually cared about me. Now, I was going to have to fight to protect that life from the very people who should have been celebrating my success instead of trying to steal it. The war for my independence was about to begin. And this time, I wasn't going to be the helpless teenager they had discarded. I was going to fight back with everything I had learned and everyone who had supported me along the way. The week following my parents' visit was filled with sleepless nights and careful planning. I knew they would return, and I knew their next approach would be more aggressive than their initial demand for my house. Trevor's threat about exploring other options suggested they were desperate enough to consider tactics that went beyond mere emotional manipulation. I spent that week consulting with attorneys, reviewing my business records, and researching my parents' current situation. What I discovered confirmed my worst suspicions and revealed the true scope of their financial desperation. Harold had accumulated over $70,000 in gambling debts to a network of underground bookmakers who operated throughout central Missouri. Susan had enabled his addiction by repeatedly refinancing their house and liquidating their retirement savings to cover his losses. Their current predicament was worse than I had imagined. The people Harold owed money to were not patient creditors who would accept payment plans. They were individuals who used intimidation, harassment, and violence to collect debts from people who couldn't pay through conventional means. Harold and Susan were facing the loss of their home, their savings, and potentially their physical safety if they couldn't find a way to satisfy their obligations. More disturbing was the discovery that they had already attempted to use my success as collateral for additional loans. Susan had told several lenders that I was a wealthy contractor who would guarantee my parents' debts using newspaper articles about my business as evidence of my financial resources. When those lenders contacted me directly to verify the guarantees, I learned the full extent of my parents' deception and manipulation. But the most shocking revelation came from Ray, who had been conducting his own investigation into my family's activities. Through his network of contacts in the construction industry, Ray had learned that Harold had been telling people throughout Cedar Falls that I owed him money for my upbringing and education, and that he was planning to collect that debt by claiming ownership of my assets. They're setting up a narrative, Ray explained as we sat in his office reviewing the information we had gathered. They're telling people that you're ungrateful and that they have legitimate claims to your property and business. If they can't manipulate you into giving them what they want, they're preparing to take more aggressive action. The aggressive action came sooner than expected. On Thursday evening, as I was finishing dinner with Ashley, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but carried the kind of calm menace that made my blood run cold. "Is this Delmar Williams?" the voice asked. "Who is this?" "My name is Marcus, and I represent some people who are owed money by your father. I understand that you're a successful businessman who cares about his family's well-being." The implication was clear. Harold's creditors were now involving me in their collection efforts, using my parents' lies about family obligations to justify their harassment. "I don't owe my father any money," I said firmly. "Whatever debts he has are his responsibility, not mine." "That's not how your parents explained the situation to us," Marcus replied. "They seem to think you'd be willing to help them out of their current difficulties. Maybe we should have a conversation in person to clear up any misunderstandings." I hung up immediately and called the police to report the threatening phone call. The officer who took my statement explained that the call itself didn't constitute a crime, but he advised me to document any future contact and to take precautions for my personal safety. That night, Ashley and I stayed at Ray's house, while I decided how to respond to this escalating situation. The realization that my parents had involved dangerous people in their manipulation campaign forced me to confront the possibility that my physical safety and Ashley's safety might be at risk. The final confrontation came 3 days later, but not in the way I had expected. Instead of returning to my house, Harold, Susan, and Trevor appeared at the Riverside construction office during business hours, apparently believing that a public setting would give them an advantage in their demands for money and property. I was in the middle of a meeting with a potential client when Ray knocked on my office door and announced that my family was in the reception area, demanding to speak with me immediately. I excused myself from the meeting and walked out to find Harold, Susan, and Trevor sitting on the couch in our waiting area like legitimate visitors rather than the extortionists they had become. "We need to settle this family business once and for all," Harold announced as soon as he saw me. "We've tried to be reasonable, but you've been stubborn and selfish. Now we're going to explain your responsibilities to you in terms you can't ignore." The presence of other clients and employees in the office forced me to maintain professional composure, but I could feel anger building in my chest like a physical pressure. Their willingness to bring their manipulation campaign into my workplace demonstrated how far they were willing to go to get what they wanted. "This is not the place for this conversation," I said quietly. "You need to leave immediately." "We're not leaving until you agree to help your family," Susan replied with the same cold determination she had shown throughout my childhood. "Your father owes money to people who aren't going to wait much longer, and you're the only one who can solve this problem." Trevor leaned forward with his familiar smirk. "Come on, Delmar. You got this successful business and that nice house. You can afford to help out the family that raised you and gave you the values that made your success possible." The hypocrisy of their claims about giving me values and support was so breathtaking that I almost laughed. But what happened next changed everything and gave me the opportunity I had been waiting for to end their manipulation permanently. Ray appeared in the reception area carrying a thick folder of documents, and his expression was grimmer than I had ever seen it. He looked directly at Harold and Susan before speaking in a voice that carried throughout the office. "Before this conversation goes any further," Ray announced, "I think everyone should know that Delmar and I have been expecting this visit for quite some time. We've been investigating your activities, your financial situation, and your plans for involving my business partner in your personal problems." Harold's confident expression faltered slightly. "What are you talking about?" Ray opened the folder and began reading from documents with the precision of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "I'm talking about the $73,000 you owe to illegal gambling operations. I'm talking about the fraudulent loan applications where you listed Delmar as a guarantor without his knowledge or consent. I'm talking about the threats you've made through intermediaries to extort money from my business partner." The color drained from Susan's face as Ray continued reading from his files. "I'm also talking about the character assassination campaign you conducted 7 years ago when you told employers throughout Cedar Falls that Delmar was a drug addict and a thief. We have sworn statements from witnesses who heard those lies directly from your mouths." But Ray wasn't finished. He looked directly at me before delivering the revelation that would change everything. "Most importantly," Ray continued, "I want everyone to understand that Delmar Williams is no longer your son in any legal sense. 3 years ago, I legally adopted him as an adult. He chose to become my son, and I chose to become his father. That makes me his next of kin, his business partner, and his legal heir." The silence in the office was deafening. Harold, Susan, and Trevor stared at Ray and me in complete shock, apparently unable to process what they had just heard. "The adoption was Delmar's idea," Ray continued, "and it was my honor to accept him as my son. Unlike some people, I recognize his character, his integrity, and his value as a human being. He has earned everything he has achieved, and no one has any claim to his success except the people who actually supported and believed in him. I pulled out my own folder of documents and placed it on the coffee table in front of my former family. These are copies of the adoption papers, along with documentation of every lie you told about me, every fraudulent loan application you submitted, and every threatening contact you've made. I've already given copies to the police, the FBI, and the attorneys who are handling the harassment and extortion charges we're filing against you. Trevor's smug confidence had completely evaporated. You can't do this. We're your family. No, I replied with a calmness that surprised even me. Ray is my family. Ashley is my family. The people who believed in me and supported me when you threw me away like garbage are my family. You are strangers who happen to share my original last name. Harold stood up with his fists clenched, apparently ready to resort to physical intimidation, but Ray stepped between us with the kind of protective instinct that real fathers show for their children. I wouldn't recommend that, Ray said quietly. This building has security cameras, there are witnesses present, and the police are already aware of your threats and harassment. If you touch my son, you'll be arrested before you make it to the parking lot. Susan tried one final manipulation attempt, appealing to emotions that no longer existed. Delmar, honey, we know we made mistakes, but we're still your parents. Families should forgive each other and work together to solve problems. You stopped being my parents the day you threw me out, I replied, and you proved you learned nothing from that mistake when you came here, demanding my house and threatening me with violence. Real parents celebrate their children's success. They don't try to steal it. I gestured toward the folder of documents on the table. Those papers include restraining orders that prohibit all of you from contacting me, visiting my home or business, or involving me in your financial problems in any way. If you violate those orders, you'll be arrested immediately. As they walked toward the door in stunned silence, I delivered the final message that would end their manipulation forever. Harold, Susan, and Trevor Williams. I called after them using their full names deliberately. I want you to understand something very clearly. I built my life from nothing after you discarded me. I succeeded because of my own work and the support of people who actually cared about me. You have no claim to anything I've achieved, and you never will. Stay out of my life permanently. After they left, Ray put his hand on my shoulder with the kind of paternal pride and support I had never experienced from Harold. I'm proud of you, son, he said. That took courage, and you handled it perfectly. For the first time in 7 years, I felt completely free from the toxic influence of the people who had given me life, but had never been my true family. The legal adoption had been more than just paperwork. It had been a declaration that family is defined by love, support, and choice rather than biology or legal obligation. The war for my independence was over, and I had won decisively. The weeks following the confrontation at my office brought a cascade of consequences that demonstrated the power of truth and preparation over manipulation and entitlement. The legal system moved swiftly once prosecutors reviewed the evidence Ray and I had compiled documenting Harold and Susan's fraud, harassment, and extortion attempts. Harold was arrested within 10 days on charges of identity theft and loan fraud for the applications he had submitted using my name as a guarantor without my consent. The financial institutions he had attempted to defraud provided additional evidence, and federal investigators became involved when they discovered the scope of his gambling debts and the criminal networks he had been dealing with to secure illegal loans. Susan faced her own legal consequences for her role in the harassment campaign and for enabling Harold's fraudulent activities. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation, and several of her former clients came forward with complaints about her misrepresentation of properties and unethical business practices that had been overlooked for years. The criminal investigation revealed that Harold owed money to far more dangerous people than even I had realized. Federal agents arrested several members of the illegal gambling operation as part of a larger investigation into organized crime activities throughout the region. Harold's cooperation with that investigation became part of his plea agreement, but it also meant that he would likely face retaliation from former associates who blamed him for their legal troubles. Trevor, who had been the most arrogant during their demands for my house, faced the reality of his parents' criminal behavior and his own complicity in their schemes. The investigation revealed that he had been actively gathering intelligence about my business and finances for over a year, acting as their scout and accomplice in planning their extortion attempt. But the most satisfying consequence was watching their entire narrative of family loyalty and obligation collapse under scrutiny. The people they had told about their ungrateful son and their legitimate claims to my success learned the truth about their abandonment, lies, and manipulation. The community that had once respected Harold and Susan as upstanding citizens now understood them to be criminals who had tried to exploit their own child's success. The restraining orders I'd obtained were never violated, partly because Harold and Susan were dealing with their own legal problems, and partly because they finally understood that I was no longer the helpless teenager they had discarded. I had allies, resources, and the kind of strength that comes from building something meaningful despite overwhelming obstacles. Ray's legal adoption of me became a source of strength and pride, rather than just a defensive legal maneuver. At age 32, I finally had the father I had always deserved, someone who believed in my potential, celebrated my achievements, and stood by me when facing difficult challenges. Carol Ray's wife embraced her role as my stepmother with the same warmth and support, and their adult children welcomed me as their brother, without reservation or jealousy. The adoption also clarified my inheritance and estate planning in ways that protected everything I had built. Ray and I restructured our business partnership to reflect our family relationship, and we began planning for the long-term growth of Riverside Construction as a family enterprise that could be passed down to future generations. My relationship with Ashley deepened as we navigated these challenges together. She had seen me at my most vulnerable and angry, and her unwavering support during the confrontation with my former family convinced me that she was someone I wanted to build a future with. 6 months after the legal battles ended, I proposed to her in the workshop behind our house, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented everything I had learned about creating something beautiful from raw materials and determination. Ray officiated our wedding ceremony, exercising his authority as both my father and an ordained minister who had performed marriages for friends and employees over the years. The guest list included people who had supported and believed in me, colleagues from Riverside Construction, classmates from my business courses, neighbors who had watched me rebuild my life, and Ashley's family who had welcomed me with the kind of acceptance I had never experienced from biological relatives. The absence of Harold, Susan, and Trevor from my wedding was not a source of sadness, but rather a confirmation that I had successfully separated myself from toxic relationships that had never served my well-being. Real family celebrates your happiness and success. They don't try to steal it or demand credit for achievements they had no part in creating. Our business continued to thrive as we expanded into affordable housing development for young adults, aging out of foster care, and other disadvantaged populations. The work was personally meaningful because I understood the challenges of starting adult life without family support or financial resources. Each project we completed represented an opportunity for someone else to build a stable foundation for their future. I established a scholarship fund at Springfield Community College for students pursuing construction and business management degrees, particularly those who were supporting themselves without family assistance. The program provided not just financial support, but also mentorship and internship opportunities through Riverside Construction. Seeing young people overcome obstacles similar to my own experiences reminded me how far I had traveled from that terrified teenager sleeping in parks and washing up in gas station bathrooms. The legal resolution of my parents' crimes brought a sense of closure that I hadn't expected. Harold was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for fraud and conspiracy charges, while Susan received 18 months and substantial financial penalties that forced them to sell their house and liquidate their remaining assets. Trevor avoided criminal charges but faced civil liability for his role in the harassment campaign. More importantly, their convictions created a permanent legal record that validated everything I had experienced and overcome. The court proceedings documented their abandonment, their lies about my character, and their attempts to exploit my success. No one could ever again claim that I was an ungrateful son who had abandoned his family. The truth was now part of the public record. The final piece of my healing came through an unexpected source. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly neighbor who had told me about my parents planning their disposal of my belongings, contacted me through Ray to express her pride in my achievements and her regret for not intervening when I was younger. "I always knew you were a good boy who deserved better than how they treated you," she said during a phone conversation that brought tears to my eyes. "I'm so happy to see that you found people who recognize your worth and helped you build the life you deserved." Her validation meant more to me than any business success or financial achievement because it came from someone who had witnessed the entire journey from beginning to end. She had seen the scared teenager with nowhere to go, and now she was seeing the successful adult who had created a meaningful life despite overwhelming obstacles. As I reflect on the 14 years since my 18th birthday, I understand that being thrown out by Harold and Susan was actually a gift, though I couldn't recognize it at the time. Their abandonment forced me to develop independence, resilience, and the ability to recognize authentic relationships when they appeared in my life. I learned that real family is not determined by blood relations or legal documents, but by love, loyalty, and mutual support during difficult times. Ray became my father not because of adoption papers, but because he saw potential in me and invested his time, wisdom, and care in helping me develop that potential. Ashley became my life partner not because we shared a last name, but because she supported my dreams and stood by me when facing challenges. The most important lesson from my journey is that your past does not determine your future unless you allow it to. Harold and Susan tried to convince me that I was worthless and would never amount to anything, but their opinions were based on their own limitations rather than my actual capabilities. When I found people who believed in me and supported my growth, I was able to achieve things that none of us had imagined possible. Everyone deserves to be loved, supported, and believed in by the people closest to them. If your biological family cannot or will not provide that foundation, it is not a reflection of your worth as a person. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from toxic relationships and build new ones based on mutual respect and genuine care. Success is not just about financial achievement or professional recognition, though those things can be meaningful and satisfying. Real success is about building a life surrounded by people who celebrate your happiness, support your dreams, and stand by you during difficult times. It's about becoming the kind of person others can rely on and creating something positive in the world that extends beyond your own immediate needs. Today, I wake up every morning in a home filled with love and respect, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can provide for them. I work alongside a father who taught me that integrity and hard work are their own rewards, building projects that improve communities and create opportunities for others to succeed. The scared 18-year-old who stood on that porch with one duffel bag could never have imagined the life I have built today. But every difficult step of that journey was necessary to become the man I am now. And I wouldn't change any of it because each challenge taught me something valuable about resilience, determination, and the importance of choosing your family wisely. The people who abandon you or try to exploit your success are telling you everything you need to know about their character. Listen to them, learn from that information, and then build your life around people who demonstrate through their actions that they genuinely care about your well-being. Family comes first, but real family is earned through love and loyalty, not demanded through manipulation and entitlement. Have you ever had to choose between toxic family relationships and your own well being? How did you find the strength to build new connections based on genuine care and mutual respect? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real life stories about overcoming challenges and building meaningful success. Share this with anyone who might need to hear that their worth isn't determined by how others choose to treat them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it reminds you that your future is always brighter than your past when you surround yourself with people who truly believe in your potential.